So, a few years ago, I was really deep in my Octavia Butler fandom. I devoured every single book that she wrote. This was the first time I was really introduced to this concept of Afrofuturism. When I read about Olamina in Parable of the Sower, I felt a lot of connections between not only what I was reading, but what I was experiencing in real life. Many people incorrectly say that Octavia was able to predict the future. But in reality, she had attunement and she was discerning of what the patterns she was seeing in the past and how she thought they would show up in the future. She was effectively saying, you know, if we continue down this path, if we create and make the same decisions, what a potential dystopian future could look like. She was, you know, in movement building, or when you think about organizing, she was a really good scenario planner. I fell in love with the blending of science fiction along with world building. And I felt this kindred connection to Olamina that I still feel today. But something was really nagging at me. I kept having this question that was popping up in my head when I was navigating the pandemic, when I was dealing with the grief of violence against Black bodies, and dealing with worsening climate change. What happens when you see visions of the future that don't include you? Afrofuturism is a socio-political movement that blends artistic expression with science fiction for Black people across the diaspora to reimagine alternate futures where we are empowered, where we are liberated, and where we are central to our narrative. Similarly, Black feminist ecological thought is about the juxtaposition of the Black feminist experience with dysfunctions in our environment, whether that is environmental racism or climate crisis. Both of these concepts are important because they create a container of change to explore alternative futures where we are reimagining the world through a lens of resistance and agency. This is in service of bringing about transformational change and sustainable solutions by exploring possibilities beyond the constraints of our current realities. So what would it look like to apply this to past movements? The civil rights movement was about building Black futures. That included building policy, community power, and the movement infrastructure to support justice. Marches and protests were streamed and narrated across television screens across the US and globally for all to witness the unethical treatment of Black people and the injustice they were experiencing. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were landmark pieces of federal legislation that effectively helped to start righting the wrongs of forced migration through the transatlantic slave trade, the undeniable and the fundamental human rights that were unpromised through the Constitution, and Jim Crow. Further, it helped to pave the way for desegregation as well as pave the way for immigration policy. Similarly, in 1982, Black folks in Warren County, North Carolina, they protested the decision to place a highly toxic landfill in their communities. This was a watershed moment in the environmental justice movement. Black folks were saying, hey, I'm feeling this dysfunctions in my environment. They were dealing in real time with what it meant to be Black, racism, and the dysfunctions that were perpetrated by those in power. There's a stark reality that those that live, that work, and play in America's most polluted communities are oftentimes people of color and are oftentimes those living in poverty. So by adopting an Afrofuturist lens, we can recalibrate our perceptions of the future, we can challenge climate doomism, and we can inspire imagining what is possible. So what does this have to do with industry? And what does this have to do with Afrofuturism? So industry is everywhere, and it's oftentimes the backdrop of communities. Industrialization during the 19th and 20th centuries created a pathway for developing a prosperous middle class, and it also helped to develop the working class. The labor that helped to create that class of people was made up of migrants, made up of immigrants, as well as black folks that were migrating from the South post-slavery. For all of the good that industrial progress has brought, it also causes a lot of harm. It threatens our climate, it reinforces environmental racism, it's wasteful, and it has left communities and workers behind when convenient for the industry's bottom line. So this year, Industrious Labs, where I work, we launched the Industrial Equity Mapper, which are stories of industrial pollution across the US. We looked at 12 key geographies, and there we interviewed organizers, community members, advocates, and those living near facilities. What we learned was, in those 12 regions, this is home to over 26 million people. There are over 250 facilities in this region. These facilities emit a staggering 111 tons of CO2e, 31,000 tons of NOx, and 19 million tons of carcinogenic chemicals. 63% of those that are living here are BIPOC. This is just 12 key geographies in the US. We have to understand that decarbonization is essential, but the climate crisis is a symptom of broader inequities. And this is a system that perpetrates and functions on oppression and other things like redlining. If we understand the root causes and we are centering equity and justice, we are able to build power, which will be critical to winning. Industrial transformation is complex. Transforming the industry is one that is one of the critical movements over the next decade or so. And when we think about the industry, it will provide the critical infrastructure we need to transition to a just transition, as well as protect ourselves and communities as it relates to the climate crisis. We have to create a shared, audacious vision of the future and ensure we have the right people to make those shifts. For me, this work really represents an Afrofuturism praxis and industrial transformation. So how can we shift the material conditions and bring about transformation? Well, there's a few things. We can broaden our industrial decarbonization and sustainability to really take on an intersectional approach on climate justice and economics. We can think about how our community is being impacted. People should have a say in the future that impacts them. Further, we have to understand when we look to the left and we look to the right, do we have the right people to make those shifts? Are we committed to making material shifts in folks' lives? Afrofuturist Dr. Christopher Schnell says that, Afrofuturism is about unchaining the consciousness and really thinking about our dreams to create that a reality. So I really encourage all of us, how can we unchain our consciousness and reimagine a new reality? Thank you.